Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Red Bull are reportedly convinced that as long as Max Verstappen is within 25 points of the championship leader by the Spanish Grand Prix, the title fight is well and truly still on, and that McLaren's competitiveness is going to disappear and they're going to be nowhere once the flexi-wing clampdown officially comes into play. Are Red Bull wrong again though, however, because they've had their theories over the last couple of seasons about why McLaren are so fast, and that's not necessarily come to fruition so far. Big update on the day. Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, we have to start with a very unfortunate topic. We'll do the Mexican Grand Prix just quickly first. There is a rumour that despite the fact that Perez is gone, it will stay on the calendar until at least 2028. Not my favourite track, but it is kind of iconic with the stadium section anyway, and it's delivered some solid races, I suppose, in recent years. And despite the fact that Perez is out, it seems like Mexico may well get an extension until at least 2028. One track, though, that is going to be on the calendar for at least a decade is this one. Now, we've teased this over the last few days. Finally, they came out yesterday with this video of the full circuit tour of the Madrid Grand Prix, what they're calling the Madring. So let's just go through it. Is it as bad as we think it's going to be? I mean, probably yes. The first thing to note here, by the way, as we go into turn 1, turn 2, this turn 1, turn 2 may look familiar. I mean, look, to be fair, there are plenty of corners like this, Monza, the second chicane on the calendar. But just the circumstances that this is after a big straight, not a DRS straight, keep in mind, because DRS is disappearing next year. Now, what that means in terms of how challenging or straightforward overtaking might be, that is a different conversation. Of course, there's active aero, there's differences in the power deployments these cars will have at certain points in a lap. But this turn 1, turn 2 is very reminiscent, of course, of Jeddah turn 1, turn 2, where we have just been. And, well, this section on the right-hand side, at least in the render, that is not gravel as it would be, let's say, in Monza, so you really can't get away with it. That is, you know, you could drive straight over it. So don't show Max Verstappen this. But that's turn 1, turn 2. Then we go around this corner, and I will say, the track is designed to, like, look fast and interesting, but I actually do just think it's pretty awful. So you go all the way around the corner here. A lot of this actually reminds me of Sochi. This corner, though, unfortunately, literally runs over a roundabout because it is a street track on the outskirts of Madrid, basically in an industrial park. This is a very... There will be crashes at this corner. If it works like this, there will be crashes because, first of all, the entry is challenging. We've got the wall all the way up on the right-hand side here, so you could easily clip that. Then you're breaking into this chicane. I mean, look at this chicane. You have to really cut the corner here. I mean, our boy cuts the track limits on the exit. There is considered to be gravel on the right-hand side. He bottoms out in the corner. I mean, this to me is Singapore sling territory. When you're going over a chicane, I mean, this like looks like a horrendously designed bit of track to me. You come around the corner into this real fast left-right chicane, and if you barrel over this, I mean, you could very, very easily be in this wall like in Singapore. And even your fella who's actually doing it, he loses the car. I mean, look at this. Is it Nikita Mazepin on the wheel? He nearly spins the thing out. I can't believe that this is actually the lap that they've put together here for us to look at, because I mean, it looks terrible from all perspectives. The guy loses the car on the exit, manages to collate it together again, but loses like a second there, and then obviously continues on the lap. Then there's parts of this lap that kind of remind... I mean, this guy can't even drive around the corners, man. Like, what am I watching here? Then we go into this banked corner that we get to here in a second. I mean, this guy's inputs on the simulator here are not exactly the smoothest, shall we say. Maybe he's driving on, like, a controller, right, rather than a steering wheel. But still, that was the banked corner, which I guess is kind of cool, right? But if you're going to have a banked corner, especially one that potentially allows for a bit of a slipstream to take effect, you kind of need to have a bit of a braking zone to overtake into. But unfortunately, the next corner it's a relatively swift left-hander. There's no chance for an overtake here. There's no chance for an overtake here. There's no chance for an overtake here. And then it kind of continues on. Another fast right-hander. You're not going to be overtaken into this corner. The braking zone just isn't hard enough. And then we just keep going round the houses, basically, right? And look, some of this lap is designed to look fast and impressive. But in terms of racing, I'm far from convinced. fast left-hander here, but it's a very tight left-hander. Like, there's not a lot of room to fit two cars through there as it stands. You then send it round the right, and then you effectively, this becomes Sochi, right, for the end of the lap, and there's another such example right here. That's back to your home straight, and then, of course, as we come through the start-finish line, you then come back to the start here, which is when you go down into that first corner. So really, the overtaking opportunities are probably not even turn 1, turn 2. You probably got to hope that you're close enough through that chicane, and then you can get a nice slipstream down the back straight here into that next absolute disaster of a chicane. And I mean, even here, the track is kind of getting slimmer. Look, what I will say, Las Vegas, we thought it was probably going to be quite bad. And is Vegas a great track? No. Is it fundamentally sound? Not really. But it has long straights. The way that it's designed, certainly through the end of the, the final sector, does allow for racing and some overtaking. Is it spectacular? Is it one of the best tracks on the calendar? No. But Las Vegas has, even I would say, produced better racing than I expected it to. Maybe there's DRS overtake cheese in there, and you might well argue that. Is Madrid going to be any good? On this evidence, I am very, very far from convinced. Is it worse than I expected? Well, it's right there, isn't it? I don't know if it's worse than I expected, but it's certainly not any better than I thought it might be. I don't really know what's going to happen here, but next year's going to be very different anyway. DRS is no longer going to be a thing. We're going to have these massive offsets between energy deployment from the various cars, potentially, if some of the power units are terrible. So who knows how it races? Maybe it's worth kind of reserving judgment, as it were. But you can't seriously look at this track and tell me it's better than Barcelona. And you can't seriously tell me that it's better than Istanbul or Sepang or whatever other track that people want to bring back. And even the name, the Madring, just pisses me off every single time that I see it. So here you go. This is the overall track layout. Feast your eyes on that. And as I say, those chicanes, certainly that chicane there, is because there's literally it has to go over a roundabout. So that's their only solution. Maybe there are ways to ease this out and make it look better in time and make some track layout changes. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to it, I will say, on the calendar. This is Lewis Hamilton in London today. There was an event here going on at Piccadilly Circus. It seems like I think he was open for one of, some event anyway. And he was talking to his fans and saying, look, let's not give up. I'm not going to give up. Still we rise, right? But usually Hamilton would be more, forthcoming, right? Still we rise. Yeah, like, I'm back. Don't worry about it. But he's like, still we rise, right? So I don't know if there's some sort of concern from Hamilton on how quickly he's going to be able to turn this around. We saw him over the last couple of days back at Maranello, of course, getting the practice in that he feels is necessary, I'm sure, to understand where he is currently lacking compared to Charles Leclerc. But it definitely feels like Leclerc individually has turned a corner in his understanding with the current Ferrari car. And that's not to say that Hamilton couldn't potentially achieve the same thing as well at some point. But obviously it's going to be a challenge for him. And right now he certainly finds himself on the back foot. The car, I wouldn't say is like completely the root of all the problems, but it's certainly a factor, right? And a big factor of that. The car is clearly not where they wanted it to be. And maybe you see this as well at the sister team, right? Okay, Haas isn't technically the sister team, but you will often see some correlation between the Haas and the Ferrari in terms of their performance. When the Ferrari was struggling heavily with tyre wear, the Haas was even worse. So we're kind of seeing a similar thing here, really, when some of the problems, are analogous, let's say, with the way that Ferrari are currently struggling. And the Haas does seem to be very, very up and down this season, as potentially does the Red Bull, but they may get away with it if their rivals are pegged back. So this is the key talking point of the day. Again, that Red Bull are increasingly confident in Verstappen's title challenge. It's funny how quickly the swings and roundabouts go here for Red Bull, because it wasn't long ago we were talking in Bahrain that Raymond Vermeulen, Max's manager, was giving it large to Helmut Marko and the team, super frustrated, it seems, that the car was nowhere. They were terrible in Bahrain, the rear tyres were overheating, it was completely out of the balance window, and they felt like the championship was going to be over. Helmut Marko was coming out to the media and saying that there's a very big risk that Max leaves the team, and all of a sudden we're now having the conversation that Red Bull are hella convinced Max is back in the hunt, and he's going to win the whole thing again for the 5th in a row. So who's right, who's wrong? Time only will tell. but technically it's Red Bull's worst start to a year since 2019. Obviously, there really is no second driver, Tsunoda scored a couple of points, but Lawson didn't score any, of course, on his couple of Grand Prix. Max has done a very commendable job, I think, with the way the car has been so far, but technically it is their worst season start because McLaren are looking real tasty for now, and Mercedes aren't too far behind either, and occasionally Ferrari sometimes tend to come good. But the big debate has been whether McLaren can keep this up. Here's the team, here are the trophies, and it looks pretty good for a back-to-back Constructors' World Championship. I think nobody is going to deny that McLaren will be winning that. Can they win the drivers, just like what happened last year? They are favourites for the drivers. But Max is still very much in with a shout, I would say, as it stands. And it's going to massively depend, I would say, this year on in-season development. Red Bull brought a couple of changes to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. And they worked, right? They messed around with a couple of things. It made the car better. They have more tweaks to make in Miami, and then they have a major upgrades plan for Imola. So if all of Red Bull's plans work and McLaren's plans do not work, then we very much have a season on our hands, right, between Max and the McLarens. Maybe Mercedes and Russell can get in the mix as well, but it feels like if anyone that isn't Lando or Oscar is going to win the championship, let's be real, it's probably going to be Max. And Mercedes also have their own things to resolve with their car struggling in Jeddah with overheating. They reckon that most of that was setup related, so they think they'll do better and they'll be back in form next weekend, maybe in position to take some serious points off some of the real top contenders. But if it's not going to be a McLaren driver, it's probably going to be Max. So while Red Bull's upgrades seem to have at least worked so far, there are questions whether that will continue because of the questions about their wind tunnel and how accurate that is to reality, and the correlation between real life and the simulator still causing them some difficulties. But as we talked about yesterday, McLaren brought their first upgrade of the year, really, to Jeddah. They tried this new diffuser concept in practice, and they didn't decide to use it for the Grand Prix. So, as we said yesterday, that could be a sign that McLaren have already hit, or are certainly getting very, very close to, their developmental ceiling of this car. But the big change is potentially going to come from the flexible wing changes. We talked about this before the season began, that it's a, let's say, a two-sided or double-edged sword, people say, for Red Bull. Because on the one hand, Red Bull seemingly put time and resources into developing more flexible wing technology for this season. Of course, resources they will not be able to spend on other things, but they could potentially, as they have at least theorized, sacrifice next year to give Max the best possible chance this year. That's maybe not an entirely impossible scenario either, especially if Max is considering multiple options for 2026 anyway already. On top of the fact that this flexi-wing change is coming in though. So if Red Bull have committed all the resources, then they get shut down, that's bad. But also, McLaren are the most developed team in this area. Rob Marshall has kind of been like the father of flexi-wings. He used to work for Red Bull when they messed around with it. Now, of course, he's been at McLaren for the last couple of seasons, and his influence is very clear to see indeed. But Red Bull on this have their perspective, so we'll just kind of go through some of the discussions here, the changes that Red Bull made to their car, the changes on the floor and at the rear of the car, in modification on the lower part, which was not visible. In Miami, the series of small interventions for Red Bull will continue, less radical, but they can contribute to putting the RB21 in a more optimal window of use, and also improve one of the weak points of the single-seater, which is tyre management. In Bahrain, the main problem was lack of the protection on the rear axle, with the tyres overheating too much in qualifying and degrading quickly during the race. In Jeddah, this problem was not seen, but they asked for greater protection of the front axle. In this sense, Miami, given the characteristics and the hot temperatures, will be a more challenging track, as will Imola, where traction and management of the car, of the rear of the car, will be fundamental conditions for performance. So very, very true that in Jeddah, it's a very front-limited circuit, right? I mean, those sweeping corners of the first sector, a lot of the loads there is on the front tyres, and it's pretty much the same through the rest of the lap as well. Maybe the final corner, the rears take a little bit more heat, but mostly it's a very much so a front-limited circuit, Jeddah. Whereas Miami, if you imagine the corners, sure, you've got the first sector or so, which is kind of sweeping, but after that, certainly the exits onto the longer straights are more demanding of the rear of the car getting traction and getting up to speed. Certainly out of that, where Max hit the bollard last year, that left-hander very much so on the rear of the car. So it is going to be more of a issue for the rear tyres, and it has been an issue for Red Bull so far. So look, Jeddah on paper should have been substantially better than Bahrain, and it was. Miami might not be as bad as Bahrain, but it should not be especially better. Like, I don't think that Red Bull are going to go to Miami expecting to have the same result as Jeddah, where they were the fastest car. Like, Max was the fastest man out there on average during the course of the Grand Prix. They're probably not quite expecting that. But still, there's only a couple more Grand Prix to go until Spain comes around, right? So we have Miami, we have Monaco, we have Imola. I think Monaco actually comes after Imola. So I think it goes Miami, Imola, Monaco, then Spain. And the rumour is anyway that as long as Max is close enough by Spain, Red Bull are real confident they are still going to be able to win the title, right? So they're looking for, a race type thing. So a 25-point gap. Any more than that is obviously overturnable, right? It's, the championship is not going to be over mathematically for a very, very long time, I don't imagine, this season. But if Max can be, he's currently 12 points behind, I think, the leader in Oscar Piastri. If he can maintain that gap to within 25 or so, Red Bull feel real confident that he's going to be able to turn it around. And of course, it only ever takes one win and one DNF to completely change the tides of the battle. So McLaren are under the magnifying glass when it comes to this technical directive on the front wings. We know that they messed around with the rear wings recently, that mini DRS that they tried to shut down McLaren using. Did it affect McLaren? Have they been slower since then? Maybe, but it's not particularly clear there's too much evidence of it. But the flexi front wings are going to be clamped down on in Spain. And, well, according to Matteo Bobby, who mentioned this in the latest Auto Racer Live, he has spoken to some Red Bull men in the paddock, and they say from Barcelona, McLaren will be nowhere, making it clear they expect a significant decline, and Max is convinced that he can compete for the World Championship if he arrives at that stage still close to them. So, how is it going to affect McLaren? How is it going to affect the other teams? This, of course, is what we're talking about, right? This is actually in Bahrain, when you've got a McLaren here down the inside. This is at high speed, what the front wing tends to look like, and this is at lower speed, the level of flexibility. And this just gives a lot of advantages in this current ground effect era. Obviously, in a straight line, it reduces your drag compared to what it might otherwise be, but also in faster corners, it makes the car less on the nose, which can be a bit of an issue for these machines. Helps promote a bit more rear stability, but then when you get into the corners, you still get the maximum turn in because the wing then flexes back nicely into position. So it is an advantage. How much of an advantage? We'll see. But if Red Bull are close enough, Max is convinced they're going to be able to get the job done. But it's a big talking point, right? I mean, the idea that some people at Red Bull are convinced that McLaren are going to be nowhere, at least nowhere compared to where they currently are, I guess would be the theory from Barcelona, is very interesting for the season, right? I don't think Max is ever going to be able to, run away with it. But McLaren dropping off would not be a massive surprise. It really just depends how much they were to drop off on that particular weekend. And also whether Red Bull have correctly diagnosed where McLaren's advantage is coming from. Is the flexi-wing stuff relevant? Sure, but maybe it's in the suspension. They've got a very wacky suspension design this year. McLaren have taken that to great extremes. Is that the reason why their tyre take is so good? It may well be one of them. And this is the thing. Red Bull have said for the last couple of seasons, oh, McLaren are doing this, McLaren are doing that. You guys remember when they were talking about the water in the tyres? And it turned out that there wasn't really any evidence for that. I mean, who knows? Maybe McLaren are doing it. Maybe they did do it. But McLaren were under the radar of Red Bull, and they were saying that they were putting small drops of water in their tyres to keep them cool. Doesn't really seem like that's true. So whether Red Bull are right on this story, that, oh, it's the flexi wings that are giving McLaren all of their advantage, look, if the gap is 2/10 and it's giving McLaren a 1/10.5, these flexi wings, then sure, it's going to be relevant. But are McLaren going to be nowhere after Barcelona? That I find slightly more challenging to believe. To be fair, it's not just McLaren. I mean, this is an onboard here of the Mercedes. Just looking at how much the front wing elements are wobbling, even under relatively low speed, you can see, I mean, if you look at the Alpine, you guys have probably noticed this if you watch the Grand Prix, the Alpine rear wing is so bendy, it's all over the place when they go over a corner and go over curbs and stuff. So it's not just McLaren doing this. Mercedes have been doing it. Their rear wing is especially flexible, and it's something the TD will look at, but it's mainly about the front wings, of course. It doesn't feel like the other teams are that far away necessarily from executing here and getting close to McLaren. So the intention for Max is stay close enough and then in Barcelona kick on and go to win the entire thing. Will that work out? Who knows? Intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Just one final thing. We talked about rumours a little while ago now, pretty much the whole season really, that Colapinto is probably going to get the Alpine drive at some point, especially because Colapinto's come over, he's got sponsorship back in. Maybe this is just a Flavio Briatore masterclass, bringing in loads of reserve drivers, loads of sponsorship money and promising them all the drive and they never get the drive. The doing has been boosted because apparently he has a new sponsor on board. So it's not yet been confirmed what this source is or like what the sponsor actually is going to be, but if it's true, that definitely changes the tides, right? Because that means that Doohan's current performance level is probably good enough to maintain the seat anyway, but Colapinto definitely adds other factors that maybe Doohan is now better positions to battle on. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.